Oi, hello there, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. The 6th chapter, General Polynesia. But alas, even the three, mighty though they were, could not last forever against an army which seemed to have no end. In one of the hottest scrimmages, when the enemy had broken a particularly wide hole through the fence, I saw Long Arrow's great figure topple and come down with a spear sticking in his broad chest. For another half hour, Bumbo and the doctor fought on side by side. How their strength held out so long I cannot tell, for never a second were they given to get their breath or rest their arms. The doctor, the quiet, kindly, peaceable little doctor. Well, you wouldn't have known him if you had seen him that day dealing out whacks you could hear a mile off, walloping and swatting in all directions. As for Bumbo, with staring eyeballs and grim set teeth, he was a veritable demon. None dared come within yards of that wicked, wide, circling doorpost, but a stone, skillfully thrown, struck him at last in the centre of the forehead, and down went the second of the three. John Dolittle, the last of the terribles, was left fighting alone. Jip and I rushed to his side and tried to take the places of the fallen ones, but far too light and too small. We made but a poor exchange. Another length of the fence crashed down, and through the widened gap the Bag-Jagderags poured in on us like a flood. "To the canoes! To the seas!" shouted the Popsipetels. "Fly for your lives! All is over! The war is lost!" But the doctor and I never got a chance to fly for our lives. We were swept off our feet and knocked down flat by the sheer weight of the mob. And once down, we were unable to get up again. I thought we would surely be trampled to death. But at that moment, above the din and racket of the battle, we heard the most terrifying noise that ever assaulted human ears. The sound of millions and millions of parrots, all screeching with fury together. The army which in the nick of time Polynesia had brought to our rescue darkened the whole sky to the westward. I asked her afterwards how many birds there were, and she said she didn't know exactly, but that they certainly numbered somewhere between 60 and 70 millions. In that extraordinarily short space of time, she had brought them from the mainland of South America. If you have ever heard a parrot screech with anger, you will know that it makes a truly frightful sound. And if you have ever been bitten by one, you will know that its bite can be a nasty and a painful thing. The black parrots, coal black all over they were, except for a scarlet beak and a streak of red in wing and tail. On the word of command from Polynesia, set to work upon the Bag-Jagderags, who were now pouring through the village looking for plunder. And the black parrots' method of fighting was peculiar. This is what they did. On the head of each Bag-Jagderag, 3 or 4 parrots settled and took a good foothold in his hair with their claws. Then they leant down over the side of his head and began clipping snips out of his ears, for all the world as though they were punching tickets. That is all they did. They never bit them anywhere else except the ears, but it won the war for us. With howls pitiful to hear, the Bag-Jagderags fell over one another in their haste to get out of that cursed village. It was no use. They're trying to pull the parrots off their heads, because for each head there were always 4 more parrots waiting impatiently to get on. Some of the enemy were lucky, and with only a snip or 2 managed to get outside the fence, when the parrots immediately left them alone. But with most before the blackbirds had done with them. The ears presented a very singular appearance, like the edge of a postage stamp. This treatment, very painful at that time, did not however do them any permanent harm beyond the change in looks, and it later got to be the tribal mark of the Bag-Jagderags. No really smart young lady of this tribe would be seen walking with a man who did not have scallop ears, for such was a proof that he had been in the Great War, and that, though it is not generally known to scientists, is how this people came to be called by the other Indian nations the ragged-eared Bag-Jagderags. As soon as the village was cleared of the enemy, the doctor turned his attention to the wounded. In spite of the length and fierceness of the struggle, there were surprisingly few serious injuries. Poor Long Arrow was the worst off. However, after the doctor had washed his wound and got him to bed, he opened his eyes and said he already felt better. Bumpo was only badly stunned. With this part of the business over, the doctor called to Polynesia to have the black parrots drive the enemy right back into their own country to wait there, guarding them all night. Polynesia gave the short word of command, and like one bird, those millions of parrots opened their red beaks and let out once more their terrifying battle scream. The Bag-Jagderags didn't wait to be bitten a second time, but fled helter-skelter over the mountains from which they had come, whilst Polynesia and her victorious army followed watchfully behind like a great, threatening black cloud. The doctor picked up his high hat, which had been knocked off in the fight, dusted it carefully, and put it on. "Tomorrow," he said, shaking his fist towards the hills, "we will arrange the terms of peace, and we will arrange them in the city of Bag-Jagderag." His words were greeted with cheers of triumph from the admiring Popsipetels. Hurrah! 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 The war was over. The 7th chapter, The Peace of the Parrots. The next day we set out for the far end of the island, and reaching it in canoes, for we went by sea. After a journey of 25 hours, we remained no longer than was necessary in the city of Bag-Jagderag. When he threw himself into that fight at Popsipetel, I saw the doctor really angry for the first time in my life, but his anger, once aroused, was slow to die. All the way down the coast of the island he never ceased to rail against this cowardly people who had attacked his friends, the Popsipetels, for no other reason but to rob them of their corn, because they were too idle to till the land themselves. And he was still angry when we reached the city of Bag-Jagderag. Long Arrow had not come with us, for he was as yet too weak from his wound, but the doctor, always clever at languages, was already getting familiar with the Indian tongue. Besides, among the half-dozen Popsipetels who accompanied us to paddle the canoes was one boy to whom we had taught a little English. He and the doctor, between them, managed to make themselves understood to the Bag-Jagderags. This people, with the terrible parrots still blackening the hills about their stone town, waiting for the word to descend and attack, were, we found, in a very humble mood. Leaving our canoes, we passed up the main street to the palace of the chief. Bumpo and I couldn't help smiling with satisfaction as we saw how the waiting crowds which lined the roadway bowed their heads to the ground as the little, round, angry figure of the doctor strutted ahead of us with his chin in the air. At the foot of the palace steps, the chief and all the more important personages of the tribe were waiting to meet him, smiling humbly and holding out their hands in friendliness. The doctor took not the slightest notice. He marched right by them, up the steps to the door of the palace. Then he turned around and at once began to address the people in a firm voice. I never heard such a speech in my life, and I'm quite sure that they never did either. First he called them a long string of names: cowards, loafers, thieves, vagabonds, good-for-nothings, bullies and what not. Then he said he was still seriously thinking of allowing the parrots to drive them on into the sea, in order that this pleasant land might be rid once for all of their worthless carcasses. At this a great cry of mercy went up, and the chief and all of them fell on their knees, calling out that they would submit to any conditions of peace he wished. Then the doctor called for one of their scribes, that is, a man who did picture writing, and on the stone walls of the palace of Bag-Jagderag he bade him write down the terms of the peace as he dictated it. This peace is known as the Peace of the Parrots, and unlike most peaces, was and is strictly kept even to this day. It was quite long in words. Half of the palace front was covered with picture writing, and 50 pots of paint were used. But the wary scribe had done. But the main part of it all was that there should be no more fighting, and that the two tribes should give solemn promise to help one another whenever there was corn famine or other distress in the lands belonging to either. This greatly surprised the Bag-Jagderags. They had expected from the doctor's angry face that he would at least chop a couple of 100 heads off and probably make the rest of them slaves for life. But when they saw that he only meant kindly by them, their great fear of him changed to a tremendous admiration. And as he ended his long speech and walked briskly down the steps again on his way back to the canoes, the group of chieftains threw themselves at his feet and cried, "Do but stay with us, great lord, and all the riches of Bag-Jagderag shall be poured into your lap. Gold mines we know of in the mountains, and pearl beds beneath the sea. Only stay with us, that your all-powerful wisdom may lead our council and our people in prosperity and peace." The doctor held up his hand for silence. "No man," he said, "would wish to be the guest of the Bag-Jagderags till they have proved by their deeds that they are an honest race. Be true to the terms of the peace, and from yourselves shall come good government and prosperity. Farewell." Then he turned and followed Bumpo, the Popsipetels, and left. Then he turned and followed by Bumpo, the Popsipetels, and myself, walked rapidly down to the canoes. The 8th chapter, The Hanging Stone. But the change of heart in the Bag-Jagderags was really sincere. The doctor had made a great impression on them, a deeper one than even he himself realized at the time. In fact, I sometimes think that the speech of his from the palace steps had more effect upon the Indians of Spider Monkey Island than had any of his great deeds, which, great though they were always magnified and exaggerated when the news of them was passed from mouth to mouth. A sick girl was brought to him as he reached the place where the boats lay. She turned out to have some quite simple ailment, which he quickly gave the remedy for, but this increased his popularity still more, and when he stepped into his canoe, the people all around us actually burst into tears. It seems, I learned this afterwards, that they thought he was going away across the sea for good to the mysterious foreign lands from which he had come. Some of the chieftains spoke to the Popsipetels as we pushed off. What they said I did not understand, but we noticed that several canoes filled with Bag-Jagderags followed us at a respectful distance all the way back to Popsipetel. The doctor had determined to return by the other shore so that we should be thus able to make a complete trip round the island shores. Shortly after we started, while still off the lower end of the island, We sighted a steep point on the coast, where the sea was in a great state of turmoil, white with soapy froth. On going nearer, we found that this was caused by our friendly whales, who were still faithfully working away with their noses against the end of the island, driving us northward. We had been kept so busy with the war that we had forgotten all about them. But as we paused and watched their mighty tails lashing and churning the sea, we suddenly realized that we had not felt cold in quite a long while. Speeding up our boat lest the island be carried away from us altogether, we passed on up the coast, and here and there we noticed that the trees on the shore already looked greener and more healthy. Spider Monkey Island was getting back into her home climates. About halfway to Popsipetel, we went ashore and spent 2 or 3 days exploring the central part of the island. Our Indian paddlers took us up into the mountains, very steep and high in this region, overhanging the sea, and they showed us what they called the Whispering Rocks. I'm a rock. Are you a rock? I'm a rock. If you smell what the rock is cooking. This was a very peculiar and striking piece of scenery. It was like a great vast basin or circus in the mountains, and out of the center of it there rose a table of rock with an ivory chair upon it. All around this the mountains went up like stairs, all theatre seats to get a great height, except at one narrow end, which was open to a view of the sea. You could imagine it a council place or concert hall for giants, and the rock table in the center, the stage, and the rock table in the center, the stage for performers, or the stand for the speaker. Pusing the island, working away with their noses against the end, Pusing the island, working away with their noses against the end of the island, we asked our guides why it was called the Whispering Rocks, and they said, "Go down into it, and we will show you." The great bowl was miles deep and miles wide. We scrambled down the rocks, and they showed us how, even when you stood far, far apart from one another, you merely had to whisper in that great place, and everyone in the theatre could hear you. This was, the doctor said, on account of the echoes which played backwards and forwards between the high walls of rock. Our guides told us that it was here, in days long gone by when the Popsipetels owned the whole of Spider Monkey Island, that the kings were crowned. The ivory chair upon the table was the throne in which they sat, and so great was the big theatre that all the Indians in the island were able to get seats in it to see the ceremony. They showed us also an enormous hanging stone perched on the edge of a volcano's crater, the highest summit in the whole island. Although it was very far below us, we could see it quite plainly, and it looked wobbly enough to be pushed off its perch with the hand. There was a legend among the people, they said, that when the greatest of all Popsipetel kings should be crowned in the ivory chair, this hanging stone would tumble into the volcano's mouth and go straight down to the center of the earth. The rock amphitheater with balancing rock in distance, the Whispering Rocks. The doctor said he would like to go and examine it closer. And when we were come to the lip of the volcano, it took us half a day to get up to it. We found the stone was unbelievably large, big as a cathedral. Underneath it, we could look right down into a black hole which seemed to have no bottom. The doctor explained to us that volcanoes sometimes spurted up fire from these holes in their tops, but that those on floating islands were always cold and dead. "Stubbins," he said, looking up at the great stone towering above us, "do you know what would most likely happen if that boulder should fall in?" "No," said I. "What?" "You remember the air chamber which the porpoises told us lies under the center of the island?" "Yes." "Well, this stone is heavy enough, if it fell into the volcano, to break through into that air chamber from above, and once it did, the air would escape, and the floating island would float no more. It would sink." But then everybody on it would be drowned, wouldn't they? Said Bumpo. Oh no, not necessarily. That would depend on the depth of the sea where the sinking took place. The island might touch bottom when it had only gone down, say 100 feet. But there would be lots of it still sticking up above the water then, wouldn't there? Yes, said Bumpo. I suppose there would. Well, let us hope that the ponderous fragment does not lose its equilibrosity, for I don't believe it would stop at the center of the earth. More likely, it would fall right through the world and come out the other side. Many other wonders there were which these men showed us in the central regions of their islands, but I had not time or space to tell you of them now. Descending towards the shore again, we noticed that we were still being watched, even here among the highlands, by the Bag-Jagderags who had followed us. And when we put to sea once more, a boatload of them proceeded to go ahead of us in the direction of Popsipetel. Having lighter canoes, they travelled faster than our party, and we judged that they should reach the village, if that was where they were going, many hours before we could. The doctor was now becoming anxious to see how Long Arrow was getting on, so we all took turns at the paddles and went on travelling by moonlight through the whole night. We reached Popsipetel just as the dawn was breaking. To our great surprise, we found that not only we, but the whole village also had been up all night. A great crowd was gathering about the dead chief's house, and as we landed our canoes upon the beach, we saw a large number of old men, the seniors of the tribe, coming out at the main door. We inquired what was the meaning of all this, and we were told that the election of a new chief had been going on all through the whole night. Bumpo asked the name of the new chief, but this, it seemed, had not yet been given out. It would be announced at midday. As soon as the doctor had paid a visit to Long Arrow and seen that he was doing nicely, we proceeded to our own house at the far end of the village. Here we ate some breakfast and then lay down to take a good rest. Rest indeed we needed, for life had been strenuous and busy for us ever since we had landed on the island, and it wasn't many minutes after our weary heads struck the pillows that the whole crew of us was sound asleep. The 9th chapter, The Election. We were awakened by music. The glaring noonday sunlight was streaming in at our door, outside of which some kind of a band appeared to be playing. We got up and looked out. Our house was surrounded by the whole population of Popsipetel. We were used to having quite a number of curious and admiring Indians waiting at our door at all hours, but this was quite different. The vast crowd was dressed in its best clothes. Bright beads, gaudy feathers, and gay blankets gave cheerful colour to the scene. Everyone seemed in very good humour, singing or playing on musical instruments, mostly painted wooden whistles or drums made from skins. We found Polynesia, who, while we slept, had arrived back from Bag-Jagderag, sitting on our doorpost, watching the show. We asked her what all the holiday making was about. The result of the election has just been announced, she said. The name of the new chief was given out at noon. And who is the new chief? Asked the doctor. You are, said Polynesia quietly. I? Gasped the doctor. Well, of all things. Yes, she said. You're the one. And what's more, they've changed your surname for you. They didn't think that Dolittle was a proper or respectful name for a man who had done so much. So you are now to be known as Jong Thinkalot. How do you like it? But I don't want to be a chief, said the doctor in an irritable voice. I'm afraid you'll have to work hard to get out of it now, said she, unless you're willing to put to sea again in one of their rickety canoes. You see, you've been elected not merely the chief of the Popsipetels, you're to be a king, the king of the whole of Spider Monkey Island. The Bag-Jagderags, who were so anxious to have you govern them, sent spies and messengers ahead of you, and when they found that you had been elected chief of the Popsipetels overnight, they were bitterly disappointed. However, rather than lose you altogether, the Bag-Jagderags were willing to give up their independence and insisted that they and their lands be united to the Popsipetels in order that you could be made king of both. So now you're in for it. Oh, Lord, groaned the doctor. I do wish they wouldn't be so enthusiastic. Bother it, I don't want to be king. I should think, Doctor, said I, you'd feel rather proud and glad. I wish I had a chance to be a king. Oh, I know it sounds grand, said he, pulling on his boots miserably. But the trouble is, you can't take up responsibilities and then just drop them again when you feel like it. I have my own work to do. Scarcely one moment have I had to give to natural history since I landed on this island. I've been doing someone else's business all this time, and now they want me to go on doing it. Why, once I'm made king of the Popsipetels, that's the end of me as a useful naturalist. I'd be too busy for anything, all I'd be then is just a king. Well, that's something, said Bumpo. My father is a king and has 120 wives. That would make it worse, said the doctor. 120 times worse. I have my work to do. I don't want to be king. Look, said Polynesia. Here come the head men to announce your election. Hurry up and get your boots laced. The throng before our door had suddenly parted asunder, making a long lane, and down this we now saw a group of personages coming towards us. The man in front, a handsome old Indian with a wrinkled face, carried in his hands a wooden crown, a truly beautiful and gorgeous crown, even though of wood. Wonderfully carved and painted, it had 2 lovely blue feathers springing from the front of it. Behind the old man came 8 strong Indians bearing a litter, a sort of chair with long handles underneath to carry it by. Kneeling down on one knee, bending his head almost to the ground, the old man addressed the doctor, who now stood in the doorway, putting on his collar and tie. Almighty One, said he, we bring you word from the Popsipetel people. Great are your deeds beyond belief. Kind is your heart, and your wisdom deeper than the sea. Our chief is dead. The people clamor for a worthy leader. Our old enemies, the Bag-Jagderags, are become, through you, our brothers and good friends. They too desire to bask beneath the sunshine of your smile. Behold then, I bring to you the sacred crown of Popsipetel, which, since ancient days when this island and its peoples were one, beneath one monarch, has rested on no kingly brow. O kindly one, we are bidden by the united voices of the peoples of this land to carry you to the Whispering Rocks, that there, with all respect and majesty, you may be crowned our king, king of all the moving land. The good Indians did not seem to have even considered the possibility of Dr. Dolittle, of John Dolittle's refusing. As for the poor doctor, I never saw him so upset by anything. It was in fact the only time I have known him to get thoroughly fussed. Oh dear, I heard him murmur, looking around wildly for some escape. What shall I do? Did any of you see where I laid that stud of mine? How on earth can I get this collar on without a stud? What a day this is, to be sure. Maybe it rolled under the bed. Bumpo, I do think they might have given me a day or so to think over in. I do think they might have given me a day or so to think it over in. Who ever heard of waking a man right out of his sleep and telling him he's got to be a king before he has even washed his face? Can't any of you find it Maybe you're standing on it, Bumpo. Move your feet. Oh, don't bother about your stud, said Polynesia. You will have to be crowned without a collar. They won't know the difference. I tell you, I'm not going to be crowned, cried the doctor. Not if I can help it. I'll make them a speech. Perhaps that will satisfy them. He turned his back. He turned back to the Indians at the door. My friends, he said, I am not worthy of this great honor you would do me. Little or no skill have I in the arts of kingcraft. Assuredly, among your own brave men you will find many better fitted to lead you. For this compliment, this confidence and trust, I thank you. But I pray you, do not think of me for such high duties which I could not possibly fulfill. The old man repeated his words to the people behind him in a louder voice. Stolidly they shook their heads, moving not an inch. The old man turned back to the doctor. You are the chosen one, said he. They will have none but you. Into the doctor's perplexed face suddenly there came a flash of hope. I'll go and see Long Arrow, he whispered to me. Perhaps he will know of some way to get me out of this. And asking the personages to excuse him a moment, he left them there standing at his door and hurried off in the direction of Long Arrow's house. I followed him. We found our big friend lying on a grass bed outside his home where he had been moved that he might witness the holiday making. Long Arrow, said the doctor, speaking quickly in eagle tongue so that the bystanders should not overhear. In dire peril I come to you for help. These men would make me their king. If such a thing befall me, all the great work I hope to do must go undone, for who is there unfreer than a king? I pray you speak with them and persuade their kind, well-meaning hearts that what they plan to do would be unwise. Long Arrow raised himself upon his elbow. Oh, kindly one, he said. This seemed now to have become the usual manner of address when speaking to the doctor. Sorely it grieves me that the first wish you ask of me I should be unable to grant. Alas, I can do nothing. These people have so set their hearts on keeping you for king that if I tried to interfere they would drive me from their land and likely crown you in the end in any case. A king you must be, if only for a while. We must so arrange the business of governing that you may have time to give to nature. We must so arrange the business of governing that you may have time to give to nature's secrets. Later, we may be able to hit upon some plan to relieve you of the burden of the crown. But for now you must be king. These people are a headstrong tribe, and they will have their way. There is no other course. Sadly, the doctor turned away from the bed and faced about, and there behind him stood the old man again, the crown still held in his wrinkled hands, and the royal litter waiting at his elbow. With a deep reverence, the bearers motioned towards the seat of the chair, inviting the white man to get in. Once more, the poor doctor looked wildly hopeless about him for some means of escape. For a moment, I thought he was going to take to his heels and run for it, but the crowd around us was far too thick and densely packed for anyone to break through it. A band of whistles and drums nearby suddenly started the music of a solemn processional march. He turned back pleadingly again to Long Arrow in a last appeal for help, but the big Indian merely shook his head and pointed, like the bearers, to the waiting chair. At last, almost in tears, John Dolittle stepped slowly into the litter and sat down. As he was hoisted on to the broad shoulders of the bearers, I heard him still feebly muttering beneath his breath, "Botheration take it! I don't want to be a king!" "Farewell!" called Long Arrow from his bed, "and may good fortune ever stand within the shadow of your throne." "He comes! He comes!" murmured the crowd. "Away! Away! To the Whispering Rocks!" And as the procession formed up to leave the village, the crowd about us began hurrying off in the direction of the mountains to make sure of good seats in the giant theatre where the crowning ceremony would take place. The 10th chapter, the Coronation of King Jong. In my long lifetime, I have seen many grand and inspiring things, but never anything that impressed me half as much as the sight of the Whispering Rocks as they looked on that day King Jong was crowned. As Bumpo, Chi-Chi, Polynesia, Jep, and I finally reached the dizzy edge of the great bowl and looked down inside it, it was like gazing over a never-ending ocean of copper-colored faces, for every seat in the theatre was filled. Every man, woman, and child in the island, including Long Arrow, who had been carried up on his sick bed, was there to see the show. Yet not a sound, not a pin drop, disturbed the solemn silence of the Whispering Rocks. It was quite creepy and sent chills running up and down your spine. Bumpo told me afterwards that it took his breath away too much for him to speak, but that he hadn't known before that there were that many people in the world. But that he hadn't known before that there were that many people in the world. Away down by the table of the throne stood a brand new, brightly colored totem pole. All the Indian families had totem poles and kept them set up before the doors of their houses. The idea of a totem pole is something like a door plate or a visiting card. It represents in its carvings the deeds and qualities of the family to which it belongs. This one, beautifully decorated and much higher than any other, was the Dolittle, or, as it was to be henceforth called, the Royal Thinkalot totem. It had nothing but animals on it to signify the Doctor's great knowledge of creatures, and the animals chosen to be shown were those which to the Indians were supposed to represent good qualities of character, such as the deer for speed, the ox for perseverance, the fish for discretion, and so on. But at the top of the totem is always placed the sign or animal by which the family is most proud to be known. This, on the Thinkalot pole, was an enormous parrot, in memory of the famous Peace of the Parrots. The ivory throne had been all polished with scented oil, and it glistened whitely in the strong sunlight. At the foot of it there had been strewn great quantities of branches of flowering trees, which with the new warmth of milder climates were now blossoming in the valleys of the island. Soon we saw the royal litter, with the Doctor seated in it, slowly ascending the winding steps of the table. Reaching the flat top, at last it halted, and the Doctor stepped out upon the flowery carpet. So still and perfect was the silence that even at that distance above I distinctly heard a twig snap beneath his tread. Walking to the throne accompanied by the old man, the Doctor got up upon the stand and sat down. How tiny his little round figure looked when seen from that tremendous height. The throne had been made for longer-legged kings, and when he was seated, his feet did not reach the ground, but dangled 6 inches from the top step. Then the old man turned round and, looking up at the people, began to speak in a quiet, even voice. But every word he said was easily heard in the furthest corner of the Whispering Rocks. First, he recited the names of all the great Popsipetel kings who in days long ago had been crowned in this ivory chair. He spoke of the greatness of the Popsipetel people, of their triumphs, of their hardships. Then, waving his hand towards the Doctor, he began recounting the things which this king-to-be had done. And I am bound to say that they easily outmatched the deeds of those who had gone before him. As soon as he started to speak of what the Doctor had achieved of the tribe, the people, still strictly silent, all began waving their right hands towards the throne. This gave to the vast theatre a very singular appearance, acres and acres of something moving with never a sound. At last the old man finished his speech, and stepping up to the chair, very respectfully removed the doctor's battered high hat. He was about to put it upon the ground, but the doctor took it from him hastily and kept it on his lap. Then taking up the sacred crown, he placed it upon John Dolittle's head. It did not fit very well, for it had been made for smaller-headed kings. And when the wind blew it freshly from the sunlit sea, the doctor had some difficulty in keeping it on, but it looked very splendid. Turning once more to the people, the old man said, "Men of Popsipetel, behold your elected king. Are you content?" And then at last the voice of the people broke loose. "Jong, Jong, Jong," they shouted. "Long live King Jong!" The sound burst upon the solemn silence with the crash of 100 cannon. There, where even a whisper carried miles, the shock of it was like a blow in the face. Back and forth the mountains threw it to one another. I thought the echoes of it would never die away as it passed rumbling through the whole island, jangling among the lower valleys, booming in the distant sea caves. Suddenly, I saw the old man point upward to the highest mountain in the island, and looking over my shoulder, I was just in time to see the hanging stone topple slowly out of sight down into the heart of the volcano. "See ye, men of the moving land," the old man cried. "The stone has fallen, and our legend has come true. The King of Kings is crowned this day." The doctor too had seen the stone fall, and he was now standing up looking at the sea expectantly. "He's thinking of the air chamber," said Bumpo in my ear. "Let us hope that the sea isn't very deep in these parts." After a full minute, so long did it take the stone to fall that depth, we heard a muffled, distant, crunching thud, and then immediately after, a great hissing of escaping air. The doctor, his face tense with anxiety, sat down on the throne again, still watching the blue water of the ocean with staring eyes. Soon we felt the island slowly sinking beneath us. We saw the sea creep inland over the beaches as the shores went down. 1 foot, 3 feet, 10 feet, 20, 50, 100, and then, thank goodness, gently as a butterfly alighting on a rose, it stopped. Spider Monkey Island had come to rest on the sandy bottom of the Atlantic, and Earth was joined to Earth once more. Of course, many of the houses near the shores were now underwater. Popsipetel village itself had entirely disappeared, but it didn't matter. No one was drowned, for every soul in the island was high up in the hills watching the coronation of King Jong. The Indians themselves did not realize at that time what was taking place, though of course they had felt the land sinking beneath them. The doctor told us afterwards that it must have been the shock of that tremendous shout coming from a million throats at once, which had toppled the hanging stone off its perch. But in Popsipetel history, the story was handed down, and it is firmly believed to this day that when King Jong sat upon the throne, so great was his mighty weight that the very island itself sank down to do him honor and never moved again.